Hello, welcome to Parent Hacks with the Exceptional Family Resource Center. I am so delighted this evening to be introducing a couple of speakers from Disability Rights California, Maria Iriarte and Mary Rios. They are going to be talking about supplemental security income. And actually, I'm very excited to say that they're going to be having some very selected tips for families to help kind of make the process go a little smoother. I want to also acknowledge that typically this is a 1.5, 2 hour presentation. And so they have been kind enough to really condense it down to like the really most important pieces. And I know they'll have lots of resources for us. So I'm going to turn it over. We will have 15 minutes at the end of tonight's Parent Hacks presentation. And I want to just ask folks to please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and we will get to them after we turn off the recording. We want to be able to respect everyone's privacy and be able to ask questions. But again, we ask that you hold them until the end or go ahead and enter them in the chat. And otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Maria and Mary. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Rios. I'm one of the senior advocates at Disability Rights California. And I'm just going to do a brief intro on Disability Rights California. We were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We serve the entire state of California in the areas of special education, regional center issues, public benefit issues, housing issues, mental health issues, transportation issues, and many other services. We have offices throughout the state, from Sacramento. We have an office in Oakland. We have an office in Fresno, Los Angeles, San Diego, and then we have smaller regional offices as well. So as Myra said, please put your questions in the chat, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and get to those questions. Thank you. With that, I will turn it over to Maria Iriarte.
Thank you, Mary. So, gosh, helpful suggestions regarding the SSI program. If you are applying for SSI for the first time, I think it's really important that you understand what the criteria for eligibility is. One of the big ones is that you have to show, first of all, if you're 65 or older, fine, you don't have to be disabled to get SSI. But if you're below the age of 65, in order to get SSI, you're going to have to show that you're disabled. And just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you're going to be found disabled under the Social Security definition, because there's a very specific definition of disability for an adult, and that's anyone 18 or over. A very different definition of disability for a child below 18. So for a child, you've got to have severe and marked functional limitations due to your disabilities that are going to last at least 12 consecutive months or result in your death, whereas the definition of disability for an adult focuses on the ability to earn substantial gainful activity. And that's a dollar amount. Every year it changes. This year, for someone who's applying for benefits based on disabilities other than blindness, it's $1,350. So if you are working and earning gross at least $1,350 a month, and your disability is expected, if you're earning that much, you're going to be found not disabled because you're earning substantial gainful activity. But if you're not doing that, and your disability or disabilities will last at least 12 continuous months or result in your death, then that meets the definition of disability. Now, there is just know that Social Security doesn't make the disability determination. They actually submit all of your documentation, your application, and any paperwork that you may, reports, records, whatever you have that supports your eligibility for SSI or that you're disabled. All of that information gets sent over to a state agency called Disability Determination Services. And then that's assigned to an analyst. That analyst will at some point decide whether you're disabled or not. So always say to people, you know, you need to talk to that analyst. So you need to find out from Social Security if if your paperwork has been sent to Disability Determination Services. If so, find out what office, call that office, talk to the analyst, ask the analyst if he or she needs anything. Maybe they've sent requests for information to your doctors and your doctors haven't responded. Hey, you know what? I'll get that for you, analyst. Let me work on that. So the key is try to, and what I'm saying is help the analyst do his or her job. Get the information that the analyst needs in order to make a disability determination. The first link that you see here is to what is called the Blue Book. Social Security put this together. It explains the disability, it tells you what the disability definitions are. It explains the process that the analyst goes through, the questions that the analyst has to ask in every case to determine disability. 5 questions. And so know what the sequential analysis is, because you're going to realize once you look at it that, hey, you know, if my case goes to question number 5, that question is, can Maria do any other job based on her age, her education, her abilities? And it's possible that despite being disabled and not being able to maybe do some things, the analyst may, in conjunction with a vocational rehab expert, say, hey, Maria can do these 10 jobs, and then find me not disabled. So a helpful tip is for you to look at this Blue Book, because it'll explain, it'll give you the definitions of disabilities, explain the sequential analysis process. Now, aside from disability, you have to meet other criteria for SSI. You have to show that you have limited or no income, limited or no resources, that you have the qualified immigration status that's necessary to get SSI, that you have to be a California resident. I just did a training an hour ago, 2 hours ago, where someone asked if they could receive SSI while living in Mexico. And I was like, no, you can't. You have to be a California resident to be able to apply for SSI. So that criteria, I've included a link to that criteria. So, you know, and for minors, or if you're on SSI or you're applying for SSI and you're married, there's a concept called deeming. Your spouse's income and resources will be deemed to you as if they were yours, and that may disqualify you from getting SSI, despite the fact that maybe the analyst found you to be disabled. You know, this may sound, you know, early on when I was working for DRC, I would get these calls from people who they fell in love and they were getting SSI and they wanted to get married. And I'm like, why would you want to get married? I'm only kidding. But, you know, because now if that person got married, her husband's income and resources would count as if they were hers. Maybe even if he doesn't share his income and resources with her, it doesn't matter to the SSI program. So if you're on SSI and you're considering getting married, you need to know that your husband or wife's income or resources will affect maybe the amount of SSI that you're getting, or that you get any SSI at all. Really important to know. Mary, do you want to add anything to this disability and other criteria for SSI? You're on mute, so you might want to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Yes, I was going to ask you, do you want me to include just the DDS list on the chat? I can do that.
Yeah, let's put, so that the offices in California for the Disability Determination Services, there's a list, and with addresses and phone numbers. But thank you, Mary, please do that. But know that when you first contact Social Security to see if your documents have been submitted already to DDS, and then you tell them what office, and you've got the address and information so you can contact them. So it's really important to work with your analyst. And so I'm going to now talk about the application process. There's a link here that sort of explains the process and how you can apply. You can apply online. You can download the application, fill it out. Social Security offices are now open, so you could walk it in. You can also make an appointment with Social Security so that they could go through the application process with you. So there are different ways to do it. When you're filling out the application, it's really important to answer every question as accurately and completely as possible. Make sure that when they're asking for work information, you include the correct address and phone number of your employers, your doctors, make sure that the information is current, because if the analyst needs anything to determine disability, the analyst is going to look at your application and send a request for information to the doctors or maybe employers that you've listed in your application, to the addresses you've included in that application. They're not going to take the time to figure out the new address or a correct address, right? So it's really important. If you have multiple disabilities, make sure that you list them all, you explain them, you provide medical documentation to support each of your disabilities. If you can, it would be good for you to get a report from the specialist about your prognosis, your diagnosis, perhaps what your physical limitations are or your mental limitations are. That is always helpful. And make sure you provide a complete list of medication that you're taking and the side effects of that medication, right? I mean, it's different when you just list the medication than when you list the medication and you describe what that medication, the side effects of it. It really is important for the analyst to know.
Maria, can I add to that section? Mm-hmm. And I think, and you said it's really important to add the side effects that the medication cause. And I say that because I represented somebody at a hearing when they were applying for SSI, and this individual had, because of their disability, they weren't able to do certain things at their job. And I believe this person had seizures, so they worked in a warehouse. And because the medication caused side effects, they weren't able to continue doing the same job. And they had their vocational expert there. And one of the questions that was asked of the vocational expert was, will the side effects that the medication cause this individual, with the side effects, would they still be able to perform that job or any other job? And the response was no. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to indicate not only the name of the medication, the side effects that the medication causes.
Thank you, Mary. That's a really good example of why that's important. Letters of support from your treating doctors. So the next forms are really important, I think, to submit with your application or when you're being reassessed, because just because you get on SSI doesn't mean you're going to have it forever, because you're going to be reevaluated every so often, depending on your disability and the severity. You may be reevaluated every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And so they're going to look to see if you continue to be disabled, right? And so these forms, one is called the Physical Residual Functional Capacity Form, and the other one is the Mental Residual Capacity Form. And these forms are not given with the application. These forms are used by the analyst when the analyst has gotten to the 4th and 5th question of the sequential analysis. Can Maria do the same work she did before? Or the 5th question is, can Maria do any other job considering her age, her education, her limitations, etc.? And so if the analyst doesn't have information that talks about your physical residual functional capacities, your ability to stand, sit, crawl, so many different questions on that form, and they all go towards your ability to work. And then the mental, residual capacity. What's Maria's ability to memorize short work instructions, more complex work instructions, make simple decisions about in the workplace. And there are a lot of other questions in these forms. And so what I recommend that people do is that they take the forms and because the doctor will have to sign these forms, and work with your doctor to fill them out. Because I can tell you that the questions on these forms are questions that maybe your doctor doesn't know the answer to, because you really haven't talked about those kinds of things with your doctor. So it's really important that you have that conversation, that you make sure that those forms are filled out correctly, and you include them with your application or when they're reassessing you. So they're there for you to work with. The other thing we do is to keep a journal every day of how your disability affects your everyday, time, place, intensity, length of what happened, seizures, pain, whatever it is, what you did to help yourself. Did you take medicine? Did that work? And continue with the journal even after you have submitted your application, because if you're denied because they feel that you're not disabled, then your next step will be to go to a hearing. So this is good information to include as evidence at your hearing. And also it's good information for the analyst to know too about what your day-to-day looks like. Really, because the analyst is looking at your ability to be able to work, right? And so, if you give them a really good picture of what your day looks like, they may think, oh gosh, could this person really go back to work or do some form of work? Gather medical and other records. If we're talking about kids, IEPs from the school or IPPs from the regional center. Submit everything with your application. I think this one we covered. When you're answering a question, be as specific as possible, right? So, for example, if the question is, can you lift at least 10 pounds, up to 10 pounds? And my fact is I can lift up to 10 pounds, but only for no more than 10 minutes. If it's any more or less than that, let's make it more interesting. I can only lift 10 pounds for no more than a minute. If it's beyond that, I start to get swelling of the wrists and pain. So if I answered just yes to that because I could, but not for very long, right? It doesn't give the analyst the complete picture, but including yes, but only for no more than a minute, because if it's more than that, and only, maybe once or twice a day, just make sure that you answer it so that they really get a sense of what it's all about, right? What your real limitation is. They will ask for a list of all employers for your work history for the last 15 years. If you have no work history, you have no work history. But if you have a work history, they're going to want that information. And, make sure you include current information, address and phone number for your employers.
Maria, just to add to that also, if your employer provided any reasonable accommodations, modifications to your work schedule, that's really important as well. If there were subsidies if somebody has a job coach, that's really important to include as well when providing the information about the employers.
Yeah, because, if you don't talk about those things, then the analyst will think, well, will not know that you needed those things in order to be able to work, right? So really good point, Mary. Um, if you for your providers you've listed in your application, reach out to them, let them know that you've applied for SSI and to be on the lookout for maybe anything from DDS or Social Security. But if you're already in contact with the analyst, you'll know what the analyst needs and hasn't gotten. So, it's really important. And so if DDS or Social Security has questions, requests information, respond as quickly as possible, right? Sometimes you do have to wait for the information or for the document, but let them know. If there's a hiccup in getting some information, let them know so that they know you're working on it and that you will get that information to them. If you move or you change phone numbers or your email is different, make sure that they get that information, because what could happen? You submit your application or you submit documentation, Social Security or DDS sends you something asking for information. You don't get it because it wasn't forwarded to you at all, or you don't, or you just don't get, you get it late, too late, and DDS and SSA made a decision without that information. So, excuse me, make sure that you keep them up to date. Sorry about that. This is a big one too. Let's say that you submitted your application and your medical condition has changed. Your disability has gotten worse, or you now have another disability. It's really important to notify SSA and DDS about that and to provide documentation about that disability or disabilities. And check the status of your application regularly, maybe once every 30 days, to see where it is and what's happening. If your application is denied, just know that you have a short period to file what is called the appeal is called a reconsideration. And what happens at a reconsideration is that someone else, either at DDS or Social Security, will review the file and determine whether the person who made the initial decision was correct or not. If you are denied the reconsideration, you lose. Then you have to go before an administrative law judge. If you lose at the hearing, you have to go to an appeals council. If you lose at the appeals council level, you have to go to, your next step is to go to federal court. You really don't want to go. You don't want to do all of that. So really important to prepare in the beginning. And the time to appeal is really short for reconsideration. It's 60 days, and that can go by pretty fast. If you're appealing, if there's new information, include that, and also include information as to why you disagree with the decision. So the next set of helpful suggestions really is, I think it could apply to Social Security, it could apply to any other benefits program that you're receiving. It's really important that whatever documents you submit to Social Security or DDS, that you make a copy and keep it. If you go to Social Security to submit paperwork, make sure that you take a copy of what you're submitting and you have Social Security date stamp that copy. That's your proof that you submitted the paperwork on time, right? Because what happens a lot of times is people submit paperwork, then they get a notice saying, oh, you have an overpayment because you didn't tell us about your earnings or change in earnings. And the person says, yes, I I went in and dropped off, copies of my pay stubs and, and Social Security saying, no, we never got it. So it's always good to, to submit paper when you go into the office to submit paperwork that you get your copy stamped, date stamped. I also, go ahead, Mary.
So I was gonna say, especially with the appeals or a reconsideration, because many times people have filed an appeal, they don't keep a copy, a stamped copy, and they will hear from Social Security saying, we don't have anything on record. So it's always good to get that copy stamped by the Social Security Administration.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. The other thing is keep a log of your conversations, maybe buy a binder, and then, today on May 24th at 10 a.m., I spoke with Social Security Rep Joanne Smith, and this is what we discussed. This is what she told me, because you never know. And this is with any agency. You never know when you're going to have to go back to your notes, right? And say, no, on this day we talked, and I talked to this lady, and I called her and we talked 10 o'clock to whatever time. And this is what we agreed to. This is what we said. If I'm listening to you and you've got a lot of information and you're keeping this log, I'm kind of think that maybe what you're telling me is the truth, right? The other thing that's really important is that if you have any trouble with Social Security, you should contact your U.S. Congressperson. And there's a link here where you can put in your zip code and to locate who your U.S. Congressperson is for your district if you don't know who that is. In each office of a Congressperson's office, there are people who help constituents with their Social Security issues. Typically what you do is they have you fill out a form so you can, sort of give them, tell them what happened and what your issue is. And they have people within Social Security who deal with these they're called congressional inquiries. My clients have had really good outcomes using their U.S. Congress people for assistance. In one case, my client was having a really difficult time getting a correct answer from Social Security reps on an issue. Every time he called, there was a different answer to the same question. And I said to him, look, he had been denied something. And I said, let's just appeal. But in the meantime, I want you to call your U.S. Congressperson and ask that we have a meeting with a Social Security representative who knows the rules, right? Someone who with more knowledge than the usual representative. It's usually people who have worked for a long time with Social Security. And they made it possible. We were able to contact a person. The client and I had a conversation with the person, and the person agreed with us that what the client had done was correct. And as a result, his son's, it was actually his father, I was dealing with son's full benefits were restored. And he received some retroactive money that had been taken away, for over a year because of the issue that we were addressing. So there's lots of good outcomes using your U.S. Congressperson. Lastly, if you've been denied SSI, especially if it's based on disability, if the issue is disability, you might want to consider getting representation. There are all kinds of attorneys who do this kind of work. All they do is help clients get on SSI benefits. We have a referral list that we can provide you. Usually consultations are free, and these attorneys don't get paid unless they win your case. So if they don't win your case, they don't get attorney fees. So these attorneys are looking for good cases. And so you might want to run your case by a couple of attorneys to see what their opinions are about the strength of your case, the weakness of your case. And then you can decide whether or not you want to pursue to get SSI, or you want to pursue having representation in your case. So that's always a consideration. I know Mary and I were in a training once where we were talking about getting representation, and that they can't charge you attorney fees. They can only get a percentage of your retroactive award. And one lady, Mary, she said that she got an attorney to represent her for $5,000. The attorney
Yes.
the attorney cannot do that. That was illegal. I said, that's not, the attorney cannot charge for services. They only get paid for if they win, and usually 25% of the retroactive award. If they want any more than that, they have to petition Social Security for more fees, and they have to have a really good reason for wanting to have more than 25% of your retroactive award. So these are some of the tips that we've put together. And Mary, can you think of anything else, or do you want to go ahead and go to the question and answer session?
I was just going to add to, in the contacting your U.S. Congressperson, some of them, well, the majority of them, it's pretty easy to do online if you have access to the internet. You fill out an intake form online, basically giving them permission, and then they contact you within a couple of days, a day or two. But it's pretty easy to contact your local congressperson.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I don't know if we have a couple of questions that are very similar, but I think just slightly different. So one question in chat is that that someone receives SSI due to a disability, but a portion is deducted. And then another person said that their child receives SSI due to disability and not receiving full amount, and that they are deducting some food and shelter. So I think a question is just sort of, are there expectations in terms of age, in terms of where a person receiving SSI lives, and how those might affect the amount that they are provided, or whether they're provided?
So people on SSI get different amounts based on a number of factors. What living situation Social Security assigns to you. Someone who's assigned independent living status doesn't mean you live alone. It means that they consider you to be living independently. Perhaps you have a rental agreement. You've signed a rental agreement. So, but you live with roommates. That would be independent living status. So they get a certain amount. Otherwise, if you're an adult, you're going to be getting a lesser amount because they consider you living in the household of another. Minor children living at home get a certain amount, like $900 and some odd. But if you're a minor child living in the house of another, not a parent, you're going to get 600 and something. If you're in a board and care situation, you're going to give about a little more than $1,300 versus independent living. The maximum you can get for disabilities other than blindness, $1,040 and 21 cents. So yes, and if you're in independent living status and you don't have any cooking facilities, they're going to give you a little more than $1,040, 21, because that little bit of money is supposed to go towards food. So if you're not getting your full amount of SSI, it could be for a number of reasons. It could be that you have other countable income that is being deducted from the SSI benefit amount. It could be that you have an overpayment and they're taking out money every month to pay back that overpayment. It could be that you've been assessed in-kind support and maintenance. So if you're 18 or over and you're living with anyone, it doesn't matter if it's a relative or not, you have to be paying your fair share of food and shelter. If you're food and or shelter. If you're not paying your fair share of food and or shelter, and Mary's going to put a really good publication from Justice and Aging on in-kind support and maintenance that you should really read. because it'll explain what in-kind support and maintenance is. So if I'm not meeting my fair share of food and shelter expenses, the SSI program is saying, Maria, you know, your fair share of food and shelter, when you add up the food expenses for the household, the shelter expenses for the household, let's say that it's, you know, $4,000 and there are 4 people living in the house, or let's say 3 people living in the house, my fair share of food and shelter would be the $5,000 divided by the number of people in the household, right? And so if I'm not paying that amount towards my food and shelter, SSI is basically saying these people who you live with are actually helping you with your food and shelter, and that has a dollar amount. There are 2 formulas that are used depending on the circumstances. One of the formulas can actually take from your SSI. It's now close to $300. So if you were independent living status, the maximum you could get is $1,040.21. But if you're assessed in-kind support and maintenance, you're going to get $300 less, right? You're not going to get the $1,040.21. Take $1,040.21 minus the $300 for in-kind support and maintenance, and the result is the SSI that you're going to get.
May I clarify one piece of that? So is the alternative for, like, let's just say that it is an adult living with their parents. And Joe, I don't know whether we stopped the recording yet.
We have not, because we hadn't got it detailed, but I can always edit all of this out. So I'll go ahead and stop it now.
Then we'll keep it going. But if we are looking at an adult residing with their parents, is there an obligation to then pay? I guess I'm trying to clarify the in-kind support that's coming, or in-kind resources, maintenance, is that the parent needs to be like collecting that money and applying it, or?
Yes, because as an SSI recipient, you're supposed to be paying towards the fair share of food and shelter. Yes.
Okay.
So if my benefit, let's say the maximum I could get independent living status is $1,040.21, and my fair share of food and shelter is $1,500, and the only income I have is SSI, I'm not meeting my fair share of food and shelter of $1,500 with my SSI. And unless I get other income, or someone lends me money and somehow I promise to pay back, and how to pay back, that'll be another thing. I mean, you know, it's pretty hard to get out of that one, right? When you don't have the income to even pay your fair share of food and or shelter. There are people who share both in food and shelter. There are people who only share in shelter, perhaps. And there are different, you know, there are 2 different rules. It's a complicated area, and it's very fact intensive. So the first step in understanding this is to look at that publication. And if you have any questions after looking at that publication, you can always reach out to us.
Thank you for that. While we're waiting for more questions to come into the chat, what is the approximation of the time from application to going to the analyst to possibly getting a determination? Or is there any sort of standard coming out of COVID?
Well, we're coming out of COVID, so the offices are open again. I have no idea at this point what it's taking. And I think it's case by case. I mean, some people's cases are more complicated. Their disabilities may, you know, there may be more involved. There are situations where, depending on your disability, you might be found presumptively eligible for SSI, and the SSI program will actually start paying you your benefit right away. while the analyst makes the disability determination. And there's a list of disabilities that can make you presumptively eligible for SSI, including Down syndrome, allegation of Down syndrome, spinal cord injuries, Lou Gehrig's disease, end-stage renal failure, autism with me, and there's other criteria for that. So if your disability, if you have a disability on the presumptive eligibility list and it meets the criteria, you know, you could start getting your benefit right away. They'll pay you up to 6 months of benefits while they wait for the analyst to do his or her job, and Social Security to make sure that you're low income, low resources, you have the qualified alien status, you're a California resident. Yeah.
And usually, I was just going to add, Maria, that usually when one applies, if you apply online, it will say it can take between 45 and 180 days.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes longer depending on, you know, whether there's information missing or they're not able to contact, you know, the providers. So that could prolong the application process.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And there's also something called being eligible because your disability meets the list of compassionate allowances. So there are disabilities where Social Security says, for sure, we're going to find this person eligible or disabled, right? And you can actually type, and Mary can put the link in chat to the list of compassionate allowances. And so you look up your disability, and if you meet the criteria, you know, the severity and whatever it is are requiring for that disability, if you meet all of that, you're going to be found disabled. But remember, you still have to meet the other criteria: low income, low resources, qualified alien status, California resident. But at least they will find you to be disabled, and it's a really quick process. I mean, within weeks, you'll be found disabled. So, but other than that, you know, it could take a while. I mean, I've heard of cases even taking longer than a year, but, you know, it just depends.
And I see Mary has put that link into the chat, the one about compassionate allowances, if you're following along at home. And I am looking to see if there are some other questions. I did see that there was how to reach our presenters. And I know Mary has provided her email. The other place, of course, is disabilityrightscalifornia.org. And there's, I know, a wealth of information on all sorts of topics, both SSI, but a lot of benefits topics, education, things about COVID. So just as a plug, that's DRC is one of my colleague Joe and my favorite resources to send people to use. I was going to also ask, I'm just kind of giving some questions here. What are, if there's a mistake that you would encourage us to avoid? Because I know you've said, do this, and obviously the one I'm taking away is like, keep your information, your points of contact, like make it as easy as possible to not have, you know, information go off course. But are there other things that people do that cause more problems later on?
Not understanding the process, not understanding the definitions of disability that Social Security uses, the sequential analysis, people assuming that because you have a disability, you're going to be found disabled. So I think it's really, and it's not necessarily because they don't want to know, it's just they just don't know where to get the information. So to me, it's really, if you understand the eligibility criteria and how they determine disability, I think it really can make a difference. It can inform the kind of information that you're going to want to submit with your application, right? I mean, I've heard of people submitting records from 20 years ago. Well, what good is that when you want to establish that you meet the criteria today, right, for disability? So I think it's really important. Mary, what would you
I
say not to do?
Well,
Or that
I don't think it's not, well, I think one of the things that we really talk about when doing trainings, Maria, is making sure that there's consistency in terms of the records. That is really important because, and you know, depending on the culture, I know it's really difficult to have these conversations because you're dealing with these things, especially with kids on a daily basis. And you know, like Maria says, when you go to the doctor, you're not ready to have this conversation with what's going on because to you, to the individual person or to the parent, they do these things on a daily basis, you know, and sometimes they don't explain to the doctors, they don't explain to their regional center coordinators or anybody else, and even the school districts. I mean, having consistencies, especially if they're children, you know, with the IEP, with the IPP, talk about the issues or write them down, make a list of what's happening, and give them a copy. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So, and you bring a good point to Mary, because sometimes people think that if they throw enough documents on the wall, they'll stick. That's really the wrong way to do it. You need to make sure that every document you submit with your application or you submit to Social Security is consistent in facts. If one document says one thing about something and the other document you submit says something totally different about the same issue, who is the analyst or Social Security to believe? You've got two different documents about the same issue that say two different things. So you really have to go comb through the records and everything that you want to submit with your application to make sure that the records are factually consistent with each other, right? Really important to do that.
Yes, Marie. The other thing, one of the questions that we get a lot is the transition from a child to an adult, and why is the Social Security going to reevaluate to see if my child still qualifies at the age of 18? And Maria, you say this way better than I do. I mean, the parents say, well, you know, they still have a disability. So why are they going to reevaluate? So, and Maria can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So a child receiving SSI turns 18, gets a letter from SSI saying we're going to reevaluate to see if you continue to be disabled. They do the evaluation because now they're using the adult definition of disability, which focuses on your ability to work and earn money. And the next letter may be, oh, you're no longer disabled. And the parents call us and say, wait a minute, nothing happened, my son didn't suddenly, have a miracle cure. It was miraculously cured at the moment he turned 18. In fact, he remains the same. So I don't understand why they say that my son's no longer disabled. Well, it's because the son is now an adult, turned 18, the analyst is using a different definition of disability. And that's not to say that the conclusion of not being disabled is correct or not, because the analyst could be wrong about it. But you have the ability to go to a hearing, right, to ask for reconsideration. And then if you lose that one, go to hearing. So yeah, that's a big one, because they don't understand that now there's a new, at 18, there's a new definition of disability that applies. What else, Mary? I'm trying to think of what else people, what should they be doing that they don't do?
We have a new document to look at.
I actually pulled it up while you were talking. So this is the definition of disability for children and for adults.
Yeah. And if you are applying for disability based on blindness, there's another definition too.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so it's really important that's really important to do. Let me think of something else that people don't do. Well, they don't do because they don't know to do, which is work with the analyst at DDS. They don't know that. They don't know that it's not Social Security who's doing the disability determination. They don't, so how, if you don't know, you don't do, right? But now all of you know, so if you ever have to, reach out to the DDS and talk to the analyst and work with the analyst.
I agree with you, Maria, because sometimes the analyst is having a difficult time trying to get documentation from doctors. You may have that conversation with the analyst, and you may ask the analyst, do you have all the documentation you need, or is there anything missing? At that point, you can say, well, you can try to help them as much to try to expedite the process.
Yeah.
I would certainly never have known to call and try to find this other agency that's doing something with I just would never have guessed that piece. So that's super. I know what I'm doing tomorrow, let's just say. I think I'd like to kind of circle back to when you talk about being really specific and yet accurate, because I was really shocked when it was like, can the person work? And it was so stark and yes, it seems to call for yes or no, and then down a few more questions. If there wasn't space to explain, fill out your answer here, and I'd love for you to tease out a little bit more of the ways that some of those questions beg for a little more clarification.
Well, those questions are not questions that they're going to be asking you in the application. This is the sequential analysis that the analyst uses when they're evaluating whether you're disabled. The first question is Maria earning substantial gainful activity? If I am, I'm not disabled. If I'm not, the next question is her disability going to last at least 12 continuous months or result in her death? If yes, then are her disabilities in the adult listing of impairments in the Blue Book? If yes, I'm disabled. If no, then we go to questions number 4 and 5, which are question number 4 is that the analyst has to ask, can Maria do the same job she did before? And I explained that even if I can't use my hands, with technology, I can still do the same work I did before and still be found not disabled, right? Under the definition of disability. Yes, I'm disabled, but not under the definition of disability for Social Security. And then lastly, if I can't do the same job I did before, it's like really, out there in the job world, based on her limitations, her education, her work experience, are there any other jobs that Maria can do, even if she has a disability, right? And that's where it gets really hard, because now the analyst is working with a voc rehab expert, and they're taking all of that data and they're coming up with perhaps 10 jobs that I can do, right? And my job and they deny me based on disability. And my job at the hearing is going to be to convince the judge that I can't do them. Yeah, I can do that with my testimony. I can do that with medical records. I can have maybe my doctor address, the voc rehab's report or their conclusions as to why I can do these 10 jobs. I may have to hire my own voc rehab expert. I mean, it just gets hard, to do this on your own. That's why I say sometimes it's worth having an attorney. They do this kind of work all the time. This is how they make their living, right? They know how to do this. And yeah, there are situations where it's going to be very easy for the person to get SSI, to establish disability, but there will be these hard cases. And it may be worth giving up 25% of your retroactive pay to get the job done right the first time rather than having to be denied and then starting to appeal, right? Or it just gets harder.
Marianne, I just want to add that Moira brings up a good point in terms of, you know, when they ask these questions, you know, can you walk, can you bend, to elaborate, because they don't ask you these additional questions. The same thing with the activities of daily living. You get a form, you know, these questions may be asked once, twice, maybe 3 times on the same form in different ways. You should elaborate what your limitations are. For example, can you walk? Some people will just put yes without indicating, I can walk, but I have to stop every 2 minutes to rest. So I think that's really important that you include that in your form where it asks you what your limitations are, or if you can walk, bend, stoop. I mean, if there are certain things that you cannot do and you need to elaborate, please put that in the document. They have, if they don't have an extra, extra space on their forms, create, add an additional document, your own document.
Also, those residual and mental residual function capacity forms are really important to fill out properly with your doctor and submit them with your application or whenever you're being assessed, whether you're being reevaluated for disability, because it's all these questions about physical abilities to do things at work, right? So really, those are like critical. You need control over those documents, and you need to make sure they're filled out properly. When do you talk to a doctor about all these things? Can I lift more than, a doctor may not know what I can lift, right? It's hard. So yeah, those forms are really ultra important.
And I think that's certainly, just as a comment, something that I'm learning going through the process with a new adult, that how much time and effort it is taking for a variety of reasons to work with our long time primary care manager, just filling out various forms for various agencies and courts and things like that. But I want to be cognizant that we are almost at our 8 o'clock hour, and I want to put out a call for any last questions. And if there are none, I do want to invite Joe, if he wants to come online, or if he wants me to explain how our participants can save the chat. We are going to be emailing a copy of the documents that were used tonight, but I know that there was a lot of great details in the chat that we also want to capture. Joe, did you want to say something?
Yep. So if you'd like to save the chat, you can click on the chat button in your control bar. And when it comes up, there'll be 3 little dots right next to where it says to and everyone at the bottom. You'll see a little sheet, emoji, and then 3 little dots. If you click those 3 little dots and you click save chat, Zoom will create a file in your documents titled Zoom. And when you click on that and open it up, you can go to it by today's date and you'll find the chat in there. It'll be a text file. The links, you'll have to copy them and repaste them somewhere else to get them to work. But everything that's in the chat will be there.
And I want to really I'm going to thank our interpreter this evening, Mario Garcia, who always shows up and does such great work for us. I want to thank my colleague, Joe Goyos, who makes all of the Zoom happen and helps, schedule people and get it all together. I want to really reach out to Mary Rios and Maria Iriarte to say thank you. I know this was, kind of out of the comfort zone, but I really appreciate you distilling it to those really most impactful pieces of applying and advocating for your loved one. And I want to thank anyone who came this evening, and these will be up on our YouTube. I don't know if Joe wants to talk about our YouTube channel.
Yes, if you go ahead and go on YouTube and search for EFRC Online, you'll be able to find our YouTube site and all of the parent hacks that we've done since, was it August or July?
July of 2021.
have been uploaded there. This one will be up there in about a week or so. And there was one last question that came in.
Oh.
And it said, is there a cap on the amount an advocate can charge, or does that only apply to an attorney?
Is there a cap on what the attorneys?
An advocate versus attorney.
Yeah, advocates can also go, you don't need an attorney to represent you. I don't know 100% if that's,
The judge still has to approve that, Maria.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it still applies whether you're an advocate or you're an attorney. It's 25% of the recovery. Yeah, you don't have to get an attorney to go to a hearing. You can hire someone who's not an attorney, who does this kind of work, who's been doing this kind of work. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I always talk about attorneys, but you don't need an attorney to go to an administrative law judge hearing. You just need someone who knows what they're doing. But yeah, now just quickly, fees and costs are two different things. It's possible that if you have an attorney and the attorney says to you, look, we're going to need a report from this expert, and my health, let's say it's me, Maria, we need a report from this expert, but, and my health insurance won't cover it. That's money that I'm going to have to pay out of pocket. Those are costs of the case. Those are not fees. The attorney may upfront the cost for me and pay that expert out of his or her own pocket. But at the end of the case, whether we win or lose, I still owe that money. So fees and costs are two different things.
A great distinction. My father ended up going to Social Security, got denied, appealed, got denied, and didn't get approved till he had an attorney represent him. And that's when we found out there were several expert witnesses that were used. And that's when we found out that fees and
Costs are different.
absolutely.
Oh my God. And you were never informed that these experts were being hired to do this?
Don't know. I was 14 at the time.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. But
Yeah. But yeah,
I knew
that could
it came as a surprise to the family.
It sure did. I'm sure it did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, again, this was really informative and just really helpful. I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like I have a lot more information. And I just, again, want to thank you for coming out this evening. And to everyone else, please think about following us at Facebook, EFRC Online. Think about checking in our calendar, which is available at efrconline.org, to see what upcoming events we have. Joe, anything you want to plug? And otherwise, he's going to tell you about surveys.
Yes, when you exit this, you'll be prompted to a survey, which will be on Google Forms. Please fill it out. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what are the topics you'd like to see presented. When we send out the follow-up email with the handout, we'll also provide a link there to the YouTube site, so you'll be able to connect with previous recordings as well as reference this one again in the future.
Otherwise, thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Good
Thank you. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Mario.